Do you remember reading those choose your own adventure Goosebumps books as a kid? It gave you a choice to do one thing or another and to skip ahead to a certain page depending on your answer. Well, if you don't, yeah, those books existed and I was obsessed with them. So imagine my surprise when years later we got a video game with more or less the exact same concept called Until Dawn. Until Dawn is one of my all-time favorite video games. You get to choose what the characters do, who to save, whether or not to walk into what is so obviously a death trap, and above all else, while Until Dawn has a somewhat stereotypical horror story, it still manages to surprise you and deliver a great experience. Horror video games like Until Dawn raise those stakes and tension because if you die, it's not because the characters are stupid, it's because you are. This is one of those games where when people talk about video games as an art form, Until Dawn is one of the first things that pops into my head. And because of this, when it was announced that Until Dawn was going to be a movie, I had pretty mixed feelings. On paper, Until Dawn is just a very typical horror story. A group of 20-somethings go on vacation somewhere remote, without cell service, without any means to get help, and they start getting attacked and picked off one by one. Even just from that description, I'm sure like 4 or 5 different movies came into your head. But that's what made the game Until Dawn so special. It wasn't just watching stupid characters make stupid decisions, it was you making those decisions for these characters, while at the same time having a story that is better than most of what's in the genre. For a movie, even if you got Rami Malek, Hayden Panettiere, and everybody back to make a live-action movie, it still takes the fundamental interactive part of the story away from it, stripping it of what made it unique. So I was a bit surprised when the movie wasn't going to be about any of this. It was going to be a completely different story with new characters, a new location, and new threats. Alright, I guess I could be on board for that. Wait, what's that? There's a Groundhog Day style time loop aspect to it? Well, that's a bit strange, but I mean, as long as they don't try to pass this off as being in the same universe, then it should be okay. Oh, nope, that's exactly what they did. So with my own reservations, I went into this movie with super massively low expectations. But then I saw the director, David F. Sandberg, and I know that he's made some pretty good horror movies in the past, so my expectations raised a bit. And if I'm being quite honest, I didn't think that this was that bad of a movie. David F. Sandberg just makes solid horror movies all around, and this is another one. But with that said, this was a downright horrible adaptation of the video game Until Dawn. So in this video, I'm going to be comparing the movie and the game, things I like from the movie, things I like from the game, and what I wished had been in the movie. All that good stuff, so let's apparently turn back the time, try to avoid the hash-slinging slasher, and is that a giant? What the f***? As we talk about the Until Dawn movie. As you'd expect, the opening is just your very stereotypical horror movie. We open on a big scary moment and kill just to flash ahead to a group of unsuspecting 20-somethings about to get into their typical horror movie experience. A lot of this dialogue is very on the nose, talking about Clover's mother's death and the disappearance of her sister, aka the reason for their trip, how Max and Crystal used to date, Nina and Abe are freshly dating because she cycles through new relationships every 3 months or so, and how Megan is the one with the sixth sense. We see each character's dynamic with each other and what's unique about them, but again, this is all territory that's been covered before. This is what made the game so much more compelling. You saw who each character was and learned a bit about their traits, but you could also choose which relationships would prosper and which would flounder. Obviously with the movie, you can't really do that, so it's kinda just more of the same. What this movie did have going for it though, was all these actors. I had either never seen these actors before or only saw them in one thing, and that's a breath of fresh air from seeing the same cast and Pedro Pascal in every other movie. When they got to the gas station, they met this weird old man who basically pointed them in the direction to go and find Clover's sister. This guy is the classic harbinger of death of this movie. I thought it was pretty neat because this is the psychiatrist from the game, and I thought it was a cool little nod, but he ended up having a much bigger role than I thought. But after this is when we really move away from the setup and into the actual story of the movie, and this is actually where things pick up, despite not at all being like Until Dawn. The crew starts driving through a storm that gets progressively worse until they make it to this old, historic home/museum for a town that's been collapsed for years due to a mining incident. All around this home is the storm, yet it's not raining at all within the circle. This is actually a pretty cool and unsettling concept. They head inside the house to try and call for help because, of course, there's no cell service, and once again, the house is filled with a lot of unique things that we want to learn more about. The basement of this house seems like it should be a floor above ground. There's boxes of paperwork, a book of names, including Melanie, Clover's sister, and an odd hourglass on the wall. Pretty soon, the night begins, and within about 10 minutes, all of them are dead, just for the night to be reset to where they were like an hour earlier. I mentioned the director of this movie earlier, David F. Sandberg, and how he's made pretty good horror movies in the past, and he said that for this film, it was like a horror sandbox that allowed him to do a lot of the things he was never able to do in the past. And watching the movie with that lens, it really does make a lot of sense. Not only does every repeated night introduce new creatures, monsters, and enemies, but it does so in creative ways. Specifically, the spontaneous explosions after drinking water. It was super out of left field in the best way possible. The witch was cool, but it also didn't really continue into the later acts of the movie, so it just kind of seemed like something David F. Sandberg wanted to do. Same goes for this giant creature. This thing was extremely out of left field, was really freaky and cool. I was hoping to see it at least more than once, but ultimately it didn't come back into the movie at all. There were even hints towards other creatures like a werewolf and some sort of clown ghost, but these were either never expanded on or just never came back, which I would say feels like a missed opportunity, but I think this movie makes the most out of all these monsters, so it just feels weird that there was set up for more that just never made it into the movie. Makes me think that some of these things were in deleted scenes or cut from the montage sequence, which I'll get to in a little bit. So as a horror movie itself, about halfway through, I thought it was pretty cool. It had a sort of cabin in the woods feeling to it, and I really liked that movie, so I was on board. But in the back of my mind, I also couldn't help but compare this story to the game. One of the biggest parts of the game was the butterfly effect. Every time you made a big decision in the game, it would tell you that it was big by showing a flutter of butterflies on screen. While they paid homage to this in the movie with the butterfly on the pickaxe and on the witch's house, it would have been cooler to delve deeper into this. If they had done one thing on one specific night and it didn't work, it would have been cool to see them do that again, but in a different way on another night, kind of symbolizing the butterfly effect and the multiple different playthroughs of the game where the player tried to correct their mistakes. The only really big things that the movie and the game share is their use of the Wendigos and Dr. Hill. On one hand, the Wendigos in this movie look amazing. This is very clearly practical makeup, which is great, but in that way, it makes it impossible to capture the true horror of the Wendigos from the game. The Wendigos from the game are inhuman, super fast, and downright terrifying. While the ones in the movie are terrifying, they aren't fast or inhuman. They're ultimately just people in makeup, and quite honestly, just seem more like zombies than Wendigos. There's points where I think they tried to capture the speed and strength of the creatures from the games, but those moments are few and far between, and by the third act, they kinda just act as zombies more than anything else. I kept on waiting for the montage sequence in this movie, where it showed all the different monsters and creatures on the different nights, because I knew it would be here at some point, and we ultimately did end up getting one of these sequences, just not in the way that you'd expect. David F. Sandberg is a master of short films. He makes them with his wife right here on YouTube. You should check them out if you haven't already. I bet that you've probably seen a few of them before. It's where Lights Out originated from, but the montage sequence in this movie more or less felt like a bunch of short films that he wanted to do. It was kind of like those horror TikTok short films, and while some of these were incredibly effective, it was a strange way to do a montage sequence. Instead of utilizing this montage to show different creatures and monsters from the town, it seemed like a very Gen Z way of showing horror, and with a lot of this footage being used in the promos on TikTok, I feel like that was the point. But I don't know, I don't think that they were bad. Maybe I'm just being overly critical and a hater, because it was a fine sequence, just not what I expected. Going into the last night, they had to try and make it until dawn. I think everything in this story came together pretty well. The water blowing people up, Dr. Hill being the reason for all this, all the actual monsters and creatures being figments of their own imagination, and how horrific that is, it all fits together well. But I really felt like the emotional through line with Clover trying to find her sister didn't come together well, because even though they found her, Clover was just trying to get out of the town rather than save her sister. There was ultimately a story about friendship and to cherish the people around you and move forward, but just the way it all came across felt a bit odd to me. The ending of the movie sets up Until Dawn 2, which will most likely never happen due to the box office numbers, and it would actually be an adaptation of the game, supposedly. I think they were really banking on this movie doing well, so that way they could finance a movie with people like Rami Malek and Hayden Panettiere, but because this movie didn't do that well, I doubt a sequel will actually happen, which is unfortunate because the movie itself really isn't that bad. But I ultimately think that this would have done far better had it not used the title Until Dawn. If this had been marketed differently, under a different name, I think it would have been received much better. This is a very imaginative horror movie that has room for all sorts of different scares and sequels. It's very self-aware, yet delivers a good story. What holds it back is that title, Until Dawn, because this is not an Until Dawn adaptation. I feel like even if this had been a different subtitle, like Until Dawn: The Beginning, it would have been better received. But because it shares the same name as the game, people went in with varied expectations, either for it to be as good as the game, for it to follow the game, or for it to very clearly tie into the game. And despite a few half-baked attempts like Josh's profile in Dr. Hill's office and the ending, it didn't really do any of these things. It tells a totally unique story with a unique concept, and I feel like if this movie had a different title, this is an easy 6.5 on IMDb, but because it tries too hard to be connected to the game, it suffers. Even if this had a completely unique title, like The Water Circle, and people eventually found out it was a prequel of sorts to Until Dawn, people would be all over it. But the marketing and the title were really being used to sell tickets, and I think that's what ultimately killed this movie. With all that being said, if I'm judging this as a game adaptation, this is like a 4 out of 10. But just as a horror movie, I'll give it like a 7.2 out of 10. What are your thoughts on the Until Dawn movie? It's been a very long time since I've played the game. I never played the remake or the remaster PS5 version, so if you want to see a video about the game, let me know that in the comments, and by liking this video, subscribe for more stuff like this, and thank you to all my channel members. I'll see you all in the next one.